Welcome to From Planning to Competitive Proposals, the Good Food Institute's 2026 Advancing Alternative Proteins Planning Grant Information session. So for the discussion today, we'll start with an introduction, discuss what we're looking for in the planning grants opportunity, discuss the two tracks, the eligibility and funding, how to apply, the evaluation criteria, and then we'll close with a live question and answer session. But first, some housekeeping information. Please be aware that all participant lines have been muted. Today's webinar content has been pre-recorded and will be followed by a live question and answer session. Should you have any questions, we encourage you to submit them at any time by using the Q&A box that should be displayed at the bottom of your screen. There's a chance you may need to hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen to get it to pop up. If you would feel more comfortable submitting your question anonymously, simply mark the Send Anonymously checkbox before submitting your question. And if you'd prefer to ask your question via email, or if you have any remaining questions after today's session, then please direct your questions to us at rfp@gfi.org. So welcome to our 2026 Advancing Alternative Proteins Planning Grant Information session. I'm Nicholas Goldsmith, the Research Funding Partnerships Manager at the Good Food Institute, and I'm joined today by several of my colleagues who are all excited to present to you this new funding opportunity. So I'd like to get us started by sharing a bit about the Good Food Institute. GFI is a 501c3 nonprofit that's working to develop the roadmap for a thriving world fed sustainably. We work to unlock the knowledge and resources needed to transform how meat is made, satisfying rising food demand in ways that accelerate climate progress, protect animals and ecosystems, and strengthen public health. We're proud to have earned Candid's 2026 Platinum Seal of Transparency, a distinction achieved by fewer than 1% of nonprofits. Today's GFI global team includes more than 200 staff members working across 3 core program areas. Our science and technology team, which includes today's presenters, works to accelerate open access alternative protein research to create a thriving research and training ecosystem, including efforts to support the next generation of alternative protein researchers. Our corporate engagement team helps unlock investment, accelerate innovation, and strengthen supply chains. By working closely with industry stakeholders, they help accelerate progress faster than market forces alone would achieve. And lastly, our policy team works to advance fair, evidence-based policies and increase public investment in alternative protein research and development. Together, these teams help support and connect stakeholders across the alternative protein ecosystem, enabling progress throughout the field. Due to incredible generosity of our GFI donors, since 2018, GFI has been able to support critical early and mid-stage research through our research grant program, funding projects designed to address some of the most pressing scientific and technical challenges facing alternative protein development. Our program is dedicated to achieving 3 core objectives: addressing technical bottlenecks, unlocking and catalyzing further research funding, and fostering collaborations to attract new talent to the field. To advance these goals, we develop targeted funding opportunities that support open access research focused on improving sensory and functional properties, reducing production costs, and enabling the scale-up of alternative protein technologies. This year, we're excited to expand these funding efforts by offering planning grants to help researchers prepare competitive proposals for large-scale, publicly beneficial public funding opportunities supporting alternative protein research and research infrastructure. And so I'd like to transition then into introducing these new planning grants. And so to start, I'll discuss the problem that we're trying to address. So first, alternative protein research falls short of the funding needs in the field. So there have been a variety of investment or investigations like the GINA report and the CasaBio project that have looked at funding needs for alternative proteins and other aspects of biotechnology. And to really unlock the full benefit of alternative protein research, we need far more investment into research funding than currently alternative proteins are receiving. Part of the problem is that research funding is highly competitive, right? If we look at funding rates, we'll see that there are many more proposals than can be funded, and the number of proposals that are funded is not keeping up with need. So I've included a graph for the last 10 years of the funding rate at the National Science Foundation, and you'll see a decline in the last 2 years, with last fiscal year's funding rate for the National Science Foundation being about 19%. That funding rate is not consistent across their various programs, but it gives you a sense that these research dollars are competitive. And another thing that's facing our alternative protein researchers is that they're often competing across fields and even within their own discipline. So alternative protein researchers are not just up against other alternative protein researchers, but they could be up against very different academic disciplines like physics or astronomy or computer science, or also just competing for research dollars against others in related fields that are working on different problems. So food scientists or bioprocess engineers that are working to address different issues in this space. And so this is both a weakness for alternative protein research to be competing against these other disciplines, but it's also a real strength that alternative protein research can have because it can fit into a lot of broader scientific questions and address broader scientific questions and create research infrastructure that can be utilized not just by alternative protein researchers, but by other disciplines. But to really be competitive for these research funding dollars, and particularly for really large funding opportunities, substantial requirement and substantial preparatory work is needed. And so that means that researchers need access to time, money, and team building efforts in order to really make competitive proposals for large funding opportunities. And so to address this problem, we're going to offer planning grants. So what are we looking for with this planning grant opportunity? We're looking for planning grant applications that propose planning activities which will improve the competitiveness of proposals for these larger grant programs. So the kind of planning activities we're looking for are activities that will demonstrate community need and buy-in, technical feasibility, and or implementation readiness. So community need and buy-in are those kinds of activities that demonstrate that that research question or that research infrastructure is needed to be addressed by the research community or is needed to be available to the research community in order to really advance the field. Technical feasibility is whether or not the given project or infrastructure can be conducted or developed. And implementation readiness is showing that the team is ready to start immediately upon receiving funding, right? And so we're interested in supporting planning activities that develop one or more of those categories. The kinds of activities that may do this include things like workshops, site visits, administrative or project support and development of those admin or project support procedures, professional services to really develop the proposal or meet the requirements needed for the proposing program, as well as things like software for designing or assessing the need. And we're really looking at planning activities that are targeted at funding opportunities with awards over $1 million US. Now, again, these planning activities should have a clear program, a clear funding opportunity in mind that they're targeting their eventual proposal towards. And we're going to be offering these planning grants in 2 tracks. One is a research infrastructure track, targeting funding opportunities for research infrastructure programs, and a research project track. So planning activities targeted at producing a proposal for a research project funding opportunity. These 2 tracks differ in the type of funding opportunities that the planning activities are targeting, and therefore they have some differences in their requirements. We also are aware that some of the opportunities that the applicants may be targeting might not have a currently active solicitation. That said, we expect applicants to target funding opportunities that are likely to be active within the relevant timeframe. So, for example, many of the government funders will regularly update their solicitations every year or every few years. And so we have a good idea that those solicitations will happen, even if there's not a current solicitation that has a deadline in the relevant timeframe. So opportunities don't need to be currently active, but we should have a reasonable expectation that they will be active in the relevant timeframe. So now let's dive a little deeper into those 2 tracks, and we'll start with the research infrastructure track. So the research infrastructure track is targeting research infrastructure funding opportunities. So research infrastructure, for our purposes here, is the equipment, facilities, instruments, or software that's necessary to perform research. And these equipment, facilities, instruments, and software should be of a scale that they're typically utilized by multiple research groups, right? So you're not looking at funding opportunities that would fund like a PCR machine for a lab, but instead are looking at funding opportunities that fund research infrastructure that is going to be used by multiple research groups. So the kinds of research infrastructure funding opportunities that the planning grants may focus their activities towards producing a proposal for are funding opportunities like the National Science Foundation's Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure Program, or the National Science Foundation's Cyber Infrastructure for Sustained Scientific Innovation Program, or the Canadian Innovation Fund's Innovation Fund Program, right? It's not limited to applicants seeking to draft proposals for those programs, but those are the kinds of programs that the research infrastructure track planning activities should target when thinking about what kinds of activities they want to do leading to a proposal for one of those kinds of programs. So the applications in the research infrastructure track should have a clear target program that they intend to draft a proposal and submit to. The applications should address how the intended proposal will fit into the scope of that program. They should also address how the intended proposal will advance alternative proteins. We recognize that some of these large research infrastructure programs require that the infrastructure support multiple research disciplines, but it should be clear how those research infrastructure is necessary for alternative protein research, technology, science, or development. The application should have a set of feasible, well-justified planning activities. And in particular, for the infrastructure track, we either need to see an application that includes activities that will demonstrate community need and buy-in, or the application should demonstrate that there's already a clear establishment of community need and buy-in, right? So for the infrastructure track, we really want the activities to show what it is that the research community needs and the requirements for that research infrastructure, or that the research community has already demonstrated that. The applications in the research infrastructure track should also include a justification that there is a need to undertake the planning activities they propose. And the application should explain the potential for impact of these planning activities beyond the lifespan of the planning grant itself. So now let's talk about the research track. And I will note that this research track is not to conduct research, but is to conduct planning activities towards a research proposal. The research track is intended to support planning activities that target research funding opportunities that are not sponsored by the Good Food Institute, that offer awards larger than $1 million US. And this can include center level opportunities. So it could be research funding opportunities for research projects or for center level proposals. We expect in the research track to support activities like collaboration building, like project scoping, and like coordination between individuals and the kind of coordination that's needed to ensure that the team has the needed expertise, the needed equipment, the needed facilities, and access to the needed data. In the research track, we expect the applications to, again, have a clear target program, and again, to justify how the intended proposal fits within the scope of that program. We also would like the application to address how the intended proposal will advance alternative proteins. The application should include a set of feasible, well-justified planning activities, and it should justify the need to undertake those planning activities. We also want to note that applications that are solely seeking to gather preliminary data are unlikely to be competitive. Again, these are not research grants, these are planning grants intended to help the applicants draft a more competitive proposal to a research funding opportunity. And again, we would like the applicant to address in their application how their planning activities have a potential for impact beyond the lifespan of the planning grant. And so that's a bit about what we're looking for. And now I would like to hand it over to my colleague Elisha to discuss more of the application process.
Thanks, Nicholas. To quickly introduce myself, my name is Elisha Reichling, and I serve as GFI's Research Grant Program Manager. I'm so very pleased to be working alongside Nick to help support this tremendous opportunity for AP researchers. Without further ado, let's talk a bit more about eligibility for this opportunity. Our planning grants are open to US and Canada-based researchers at qualifying institutions. The lead organization, meaning the applicant organization that would receive grant funds if awarded, is required to be located in the US or Canada, which can include US and Canadian territories. Only nonprofit entities or public governmental institutions are eligible to receive grant funds, which includes both lead organizations and any collaborating organizations that will receive funds via subaward. However, please note GFI's guidance that subawards should only be used if necessary for the proposed planning activities. So, what does this requirement mean in context? Well, US-based organizations must be recognized as tax exempt under Section 501c3 or Section 170c1 of the Internal Revenue Code, and Canadian organizations must be registered charities or other qualified donees under the Income Tax Act of Canada. Collaborating organizations are allowable for this opportunity, provided the funding opportunity you are targeting allows collaborations and your desired collaborator meets the targeted funding program's eligibility criteria. Collaborators located within the United States and Canada that will receive funds via subawards are held to the same standards regarding being a nonprofit or a public governmental entity. However, GFI does not require that collaborating organizations be located in the United States or Canada. They can be located in other countries. If this is the case and your collaborator is to receive funds via subaward, then the organization must have received tax-exempt status from their appropriate authority under foreign law to that of an organization exempt under Section 501c3 or Section 170c1 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code, or equivalent to a registered charity or other qualified donee under Canada's Income Tax Act. If the collaborator will not receive any portion of the grant funds from GFI, such as a collaborator providing in-kind support for your project, then they are not required to have nonprofit or public governmental status. We also have requirements for principal investigators and targeted funding programs. PIs must not be a current degree-seeking student and must be eligible to serve as PI at the lead applicant organization throughout the entirety of the project. The individual identified as PI of planning activities must also be the intended PI of the resulting proposal that you will submit to your targeted funding program. While individuals can be included as co-investigators on multiple submissions, individuals may only be named as PI on one submitted application for this opportunity. If an individual is named as PI within multiple submissions, then GFI will only consider the latest application submitted for funding for consideration. Moving on to targeted funding programs, while both public and private funder programs are allowable, to be deemed eligible for this opportunity, the targeted funding program must be conducted for public benefit. Programs must be based in the U.S. or Canada and be open to U.S. or Canada-based institutions of higher education. And as Nick previously shared, the targeted funding program must make awards of $1 million or larger. So let's move on to the funding that's available. GFI is offering up to $25,000 per project to support planning activities, which may last a maximum of 1 year. Additional matches, institutional funding, co-funding, and in-kind contributions are allowed and encouraged, but are not required. Individuals who have secured these kinds of additional financial support for their project are still eligible to request up to $25,000 from GFI to support their planning activity work. We anticipate funding up to 10 grants between the research and research infrastructure tracks, which will be based on the availability of funding and the number of high-quality applications received. We expect the planning activities supported by this funding will begin during the 2026 to 2027 academic year. As I just mentioned, up to $25,000 per project is available for this opportunity. Indirect costs are allowable, but may not exceed 10% of your requested direct cost budget. Therefore, the maximum allowable indirect costs for the lead applicant organization is $2,272, which is based on a $22,728 direct cost budget. Altogether, this would equate to a total budget of $25,000. Subawards for this opportunity are treated as direct costs, and subawarded organizations may likewise request indirect costs of up to 10% of their own direct cost budgets. When you submit your budget for this opportunity, you're going to need to utilize our approved template, which we have linked within our application form. It's worth mentioning that our budget template has an additional notes tab, which contains guidance on our budget categories and restricted budget items. We highly encourage you to familiarize yourself with these details as you prepare your applications. Regarding personnel expenses, please note that faculty salaries are prohibited. But salaries of non-faculty staff on the application, such as postdoctoral scholars, students, technicians, project planners, facilitators, and consultants, will be allowed so long as these salaries are to perform work directly related to the planning activities. Further, please note that GFI will not fund any efforts exceeding 1.0 FTE for PIs or other individuals included on this project, nor across a combination of GFI-funded projects. For the materials and supplies category, please note that individual durable items with a useful life exceeding 1 year and a per unit cost of $500 or more, such as laptops and computers, are considered equipment, which is a prohibited expense. Lastly, within the other category, if you intend to purchase food with grant funds, such as catering for a workshop, please be aware that animal-derived food is prohibited. Aligned with GFI's mission, all food paid for utilizing grant funds must be plant-based. All right, so on to how to apply. First, you're going to need to prepare yourself by reading our RFA in its entirety and by creating an account in our submission portal if you don't already have one. The RFA is accessible on our Alternative Protein Research Funding and Support webpage at gfi.org/research grants, and our submission portal is available at grants.gfi.org. While you are preparing your application materials, please pay particular attention to the formatting requirements outlined within the application. You can locate additional requirements within each document's respective upload field. All submission content is required to be written in English, and all document uploads must be in PDF format and adhere with the stipulated page limits and formatting requirements. And perhaps most importantly of all All applications must be submitted within GFI's submission portal by no later than 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on July 20th, 2026. Late submissions will not be accepted. So let's talk through the application components now. You will be required to answer pre-programmed questions within the application, as well as prepare documents to upload within the application's respective upload fields. The application questions request key information such as your project title, which we limit to a maximum of 25 words, organizational information, a summary of your project, key personnel, and confirmation that planning grant activities will not involve any human subject, animal, or hazardous material use. Your project description will be a mandatory upload, which has a strict page limit of 2 pages. Your project description will be comprised of multiple elements. You must detail the targeted grant program you intend to apply to and discuss how your planned project fits within the scope of the targeted funding program. You must also provide a description of the challenge to be addressed, the general intended scope of your project, and justify the project's importance for advancing alternative proteins. As your space is limited, please do not include an explanation or a justification of why you intend to work within the alternative protein field. Rather, focus your efforts on providing the information that we have specifically requested. Within this document, you're also going to need to describe the planning activities you are requesting support from GFI for, including how they will improve the resulting proposal you will submit to your targeted funding program. You will need to clearly articulate how each of these activities will address community need and buy-in, technical feasibility, and/or implementation readiness. Additionally, as these grants are intended to improve the competitiveness of proposals to research funding opportunities, awardees may request a limited embargo of up to 2 years on the public release of specific outputs where necessary to preserve the competitiveness of your resulting proposals. Within your project description is where you need to include this information. Project descriptions must include a list of planned outputs from your planning activities, such as workshops, reports, or other data, as well as a plan for sharing those outputs. You must clearly identify any outputs that you are requesting an embargo for, along with specifying the amount of time the requested embargo should last. Other required uploads are your work plan, budget, and budget justification documents. Work plans are limited to 1 page in length, and within this document, you're going to need to outline your anticipated timeline for your planning activities. A simple table or a summary of dates with high-level tasks is more than sufficient for this document. While more detailed formats like Gantt charts are welcomed, they are not required. We also encourage you to use general timeframes rather than specific calendar dates when possible. For budgets, we require 1 budget sheet to be completed per participating organization. It's okay if your budget sheet spans multiple pages in length once you convert it into a PDF document, so long as only 1 budget is provided per participating organization. All budgets are required to utilize our approved budget template, and the total amount requested from GFI across all participating organizations may not exceed $25,000 US. If your project involves 1 or more subawards, then you will need to instruct each collaborator to be paid via subaward to complete their own budget sheet, then merge all of your completed budget sheets into a singular PDF for upload within our application. The document you prepare for your budget justification is also limited to 1 page in length. Within this document, we're looking for you to detail and justify the resources you've requested for the project across all budget categories, including subawards. We advise you to base your budgets on the actual estimated cost of the proposed planning grant activities and to request the funding that's required for the success of your project while still striving to build a conservative and realistic budget. We also have 2 optional upload fields, your works cited and letters of institutional support. All works cited documents are limited to 1 page in length, and this is an optional field that simply allows applicants the ability to share your references with GFI without counting against your limited project description page limit. Letters of institutional support are solely intended for organizations to confirm their intent to match or co-fund the application if successful, and each letter is strictly limited to 1 page in length. These letters should refrain from adding any additional context to your application, as well as from explicitly advocating for the funding of your application. Additional committed financial support for the project will only be considered when it's accompanied by a corresponding letter of institutional support. If you have multiple letters, you will need to merge them into a singular PDF document prior to uploading them in our application. All right, So with that, let's talk about how we're going to evaluate your applications. GFI will evaluate applications using 4 criteria: the relevance of your planning activities and the resulting proposal to both the alternative protein ecosystem at large and your targeted funding program, your planning activities and how well they've been designed to achieve your intended results on a reasonable timeline, the potential for impact of your project, being the likelihood that your planning activities and the resulting proposal will produce a positive benefit for the alternative protein ecosystem and value for money, or the appropriateness of the budget you've requested to produce your intended results. When we look to assess the relevance of your application, we're specifically looking to answer these questions. Are the proposed planning activities likely to result in a proposal that will significantly advance a critical need for alternative protein science, technology, or R&D? Has the applicant clearly made the case for why a planning grant is needed? For example, does the identified funding opportunity require a demonstration of community buy-in, or are additional collaborators needed? Are the proposed planning activities likely to result in a proposal that's a good fit for the targeted funding program? And is the selected funding program likely to be available? For example, if the program is recurrent or has already announced a scheduled funding cycle on a relevant timeline. When judging your planning activities, we'll seek to answer these questions. If relevant, are the proposed planning activities likely to result in a proposal that clearly demonstrates community need and buy-in? If relevant, are the proposed planning activities likely to result in a proposal that clearly demonstrates technical feasibility? If relevant, are the proposed planning activities likely to result in a proposal that clearly demonstrates the project is ready to be implemented in a timely manner if funded? And does the applicant team have adequate expertise to undertake the proposed planning activities? When determining the potential for impact, we will evaluate the likelihood of your proposed planning activities making an impact on alternative protein research, even if they do not result in a funded proposal. If relevant, we'll also look to assess if the resulting materials from your planning activities will be made open source or otherwise available to the research community, even if this dissemination may require an embargo period before release. And lastly, when we evaluate your project's value for money, we're going to look to see how well justified and realistic your budget is. We'll also consider if your application leverages any additional funding or utilizes strategy to magnify the effectiveness or impact of the proposed funding. Thank you again for your interest in our Advancing Alternative Proteins planning grants. We're now going to pivot into our question and answer session. So if you haven't already, please enter any questions you may have within the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you would prefer to ask your question outside of this forum, or if additional questions arise after we conclude our time together today, please do not hesitate to reach out to our team via email at rfp@gfi.org. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Nicholas and Elisha, for that very informative presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Renee Bell. I'm the Senior Science Content Lead at the Good Food Institute, and I'll be leading us through the Q&A portion of today's information session. We do have some good questions already in the Q&A box. If you have additional questions that pop up as we are discussing answers to your questions, please do feel free to keep adding them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. All right, so Elisha, I'm going to send this first question your way. One of the attendees is asking if the project itself needs to be completed by 2027, or does it mean that the grant funds simply need to be fully spent during the 2026-2027 period?
Thanks for that question. And yes, a very important clarification. So we expect that planning activities, your project of those planning activities, would begin during the 2026 to 2027 academic year. We expect those planning activities to likely last about 1 year. So with that being said, the project itself does not need to be completed by 2027. It needs to be completed with 1 year of you beginning that planning activity work. In terms of the funds being spent, we expect that all funds are fully expended by your project's end. So 1 year post starting your planning activities. And also it's worth noting that we expect your resulting proposal that comes out of this opportunity to be submitted within 1 year following the end of that planning activity work.
Excellent. Thanks for that answer. Elisha, I have another one for you. Someone is wondering how much time is provided for the applicants to submit their proposals to the targeted funding programs.
Yes. So that is what I just addressed at the end. So when you end your planning activities, so at that end point of that project, you would have 1 year to submit your proposal to the targeted funding opportunity. Of course, we also recognize that things can come up. There's the possibility that your targeted funding program is canceled or doesn't occur as you expected on the timeline that you had proposed. And if that is the case, we would ask that you notify your GFI program manager assigned to your project and then coordinate with us whether to submit to a different funding program or wait for the next anticipated funding cycle.
Excellent. Thank you. Nicholas, I think I'll ask you a question next. Could you comment on if a target program has not yet released its solicitation? Can that be included in this call?
Yes. So, there's a variety of reasons why we might expect a grant program to occur, but not have a solicitation with a relevant deadline. Right, like we regularly see a lot of the research infrastructure programs, for example, every couple of years they'll update those solicitations. So there might not be a deadline on the appropriate timescale, but given the track record that the program has run, we have a reasonable expectation that it will run again. So it does not have to currently be active. There just has to be a reasonable expectation that it might be. And in the event that that something does not run, or that during the course of your planning activities you decide a different program would be more important, that's a conversation you can have with your GFI program manager.
Great. Thank you for that. I'll keep you on deck here with another question. Can I target a funding opportunity smaller than $1 million if the overall initiative will exceed $1 million?
Yes. So the program itself must offer awards that are over $1 million. But as you'll see in some of the example programs we gave, like the cyber infrastructure for sustained scientific innovation, some of the awards they give may be below $1 million. But your goal should be to target a proposal that's over $1 million.
Excellent. Thank you. Elisha, can you comment on can applicants target international funding opportunities?
Yes, I can answer that question. So while your targeted funding opportunity may allow you or non-US or Canadian applicants, the targeted funding program that you identify needs to be located in the US or Canada for this opportunity. And then I'd also like to note that programs that support collaboration between the U.S. or the U.S. and Canadian applicants, and then those in other countries such as bilateral or multilateral opportunities. Excuse me, I'm excited. I'm talking so fast. Those are also eligible, so we would encourage you to explore those as well.
There's a question from a participant. Can planning grant funds be used to fund international travel?
I can take that one. Yes. So we recognize that some collaborations may be strengthened with those international collaborations in place. So as long as you are really justifying that travel and the site visits between countries well, then yes, that would be allowable with planning grant activity funds.
Thanks for that clarification. Super helpful. And we also have a question from an attendee about cultivated meat research. So, Elisha, can you clarify if that's included in the call?
Yes. If you are developing a proposal to support cultivated meat research or a proposal to support research infrastructure specifically for cultivated meat explorations, that would be eligible for this call.
Great. Thank you all for the great questions. We'll keep going here. Nick, could you please comment, can software platforms qualify as infrastructure?
So yes, software platforms can qualify as infrastructure. So the definition of infrastructure, research infrastructure for this case are, facilities, equipment, instrumentation, software, that is necessary to conduct research. And typically, this is the kind of thing that's utilized by multiple research groups. And so often software is going to be utilized by multiple research groups. Also, if the question was like, can you use the funds from the planning grant to purchase software? You can do that in the event that the software is needed for like design or assessment of need. But yes, software would fall under research infrastructure, assuming it meets the other aspects of the definition.
That's helpful. Thank you. I'm going to keep you on deck with another question. This one is specific to someone's research focus. So they've asked, part of my research focuses on the air classification of legumes to produce protein-enriched fractions that can be used as high-protein food ingredients, typically containing 30 to 45% protein. Does this area of research align with your relevance criteria?
Yes, so in general, this would seem to align. The one thing to know is that it's important to make sure that this fits into the like meat usage, as opposed to like utilizing these protein enriched fragments for like a flour for baked goods or something. It should fall into that meat use case. We define meat to not just include alternatives to um, traditional livestock like chicken, pork, and beef, but also to include seafood like fish and shellfish.
That's a helpful clarification. Thank you. Elisha, back over to you. Can you let us know if matching funds can come from industry?
Another great question. Yes, matching funds can come from an industry collaborator. However, please do note our restrictions on subawards because an industry collaborator would not be eligible to receive funds via subaward. But yes, matching funds can come from industry collaborators.
Excellent. Another question, more about proposal development. How developed does our target proposal need to be before we apply?
Sure. So, the point of the planning activities is to build a competitive proposal for a targeted grant opportunity. So you definitely should have an idea of like the challenge you're trying to address and your general approach to how you're going to address that challenge. That said, you might not know the specifics because you may need to assess like what exactly are the community needs. Right? Like if you're building a research infrastructure, right? There may be specific requirements that part of the point of the planning grant is to work those out, right? Or it may be that your collaborators bring certain ideas into how to handle this. So, you need to know the challenge you're addressing, the general approach, and you definitely need to know the, targeted program that you plan on aiming your ultimate proposal at.
Thank you for that. Another question, what qualifies as public benefit funding? I'm not sure which of you is best equipped to answer that. I'll let you.
I can address that one.
Thank you.
So, public benefit funding, we're defining this as either a funding opportunity from a public funder, such as a governmental funder, or a funding opportunity that requires sharing and dissemination of research outputs for public benefit. So, really looking at that open sharing of that key data and information.
Excellent. Thank you. And this is, I think, a good one. Maybe Nick, you can answer this. What makes a project clearly competitive versus merely eligible?
Sure. So to be clearly competitive, I mean, one thing is look at the evaluation criteria, right? That's really giving you an answer of what it is that we're looking for. But yes, to be clearly competitive, right, you need to have identified a target program, have justified your fit in that target program, have the well-justified planning activities, and then again, really making sure you address those questions in the evaluation criteria. That's what will set your proposal apart.
Great. Maybe someone can address some of these questions in our Q&A regarding proteins for poultry feed or insect proteins or animal proteins for animals, if those are included in this call.
One question I think might be in relationship to the limitation on food that could be purchased. So I'll address that component now, which this question asks if it includes insects. So if you were to purchase food with planning grant activities, yes, we would consider insects to be an animal-based food, according to our definition. Nick, would you be able to speak to the wider lens of projects that will be proposed with relationship to feed and animals, including insects?
Yeah, so we're looking at supporting projects that are addressing plant-based, fermentation-derived, or cultivated protein products targeted at meat applications, right? So that meat application could be, like chicken meat, pig meat, cow meat. It could also be like fish meat or shellfish meat, but it's that meat application. So utilizing insects falls outside of that plant-based, fermentation-derived, or cultivated. So those would not be eligible. There, it could be that you're trying to replace an insect-derived meat. Those are not common, but there are some cultures that do eat them. So those we might be open to. But using insects as the protein source is not would not be in scope. Additionally, using the developed material for animal feed would fall outside of the scope. We're looking at those meat applications. Now, it's possible that what you're working on has applications beyond that, right? And that would be perfectly fine. So you're working on building a fermentation facility, right? Well, that's going to have lots of applications beyond just fermentation derived proteins for meat applications. But there needs to be that clear connection to plant-based, fermentation-derived, or cultivated meat.
Thanks for clarifying and giving examples there. That was helpful. Elisha, I'm going to turn it over to you for this next question. Can planning activities include proposal writing support?
Yes, they can. It is worth noting, though, that if you were looking to fully delegate that writing effort, that would be unlikely to be viewed as competitive. So if you're going to include that support, just make sure it's a very thoughtful and intentional incorporation.
That makes sense. Thank you. And I'll ask this next question to you as well. How closely does the target funding opportunity need to align with alternative protein research?
A great question. So there are many broader funding calls that alternative proteins can fit within the scope of. The targeted funding opportunity does not need to be specifically designed to fund alternative protein research, and we would encourage you to look at those broader calls. So I guess really the direct answer is that it needs to be close enough that alternative proteins are in scope and have a relatively reasonable likelihood of being funded through that opportunity, but it does not need to be specifically designed for alternative protein research.
Thank you. Nicholas, this next one is for you. Can you comment on how important it is for leveraging additional resources as part of the proposal?
Sure. I mean, it is great when you can leverage additional resources, right? If there are ways to take advantage of like cost-effective ways of doing things, like utilizing campus resources for undertaking your activities. If you can get in-kind or cash contributions to expand your planning work, those are great, and we will consider those under value for money, but they are certainly not required. So no cost sharing, no matching is required, and it will only be considered under value for money. But yes, if you can bring those in and you can expand your project, that would be fantastic.
Wonderful. Someone is asking if they can target multiple funding programs. If not, what would you recommend when deciding between two potential target programs? That's a good question. I'm curious to hear the answer.
I can take that one. So unfortunately, no. When you are applying, you need to apply with a clearly defined targeted funding program in mind. And if you are making a selection between two programs, we would recommend going with the program you feel you have a higher likelihood of securing funding from. As I previously mentioned, as you go through your planning grant activity work, you might come to realize that perhaps your program isn't occurring on schedule, in which case you would need to coordinate with us. But you might also find that, as you go through this planning activity work, it becomes clearer that a different targeted funding opportunity would be a better fit for your project. If that's the case, we would also ask that you notify your GFI program manager assigned to your project, and then we can coordinate with you via email to assess which makes the most sense to move forward with.
Thank you for that. Nicholas, I'm going to ask this next question to you. Does the infrastructure need to be housed at a single institution?
So no, the infrastructure does not need to be housed at a single institution. So it's entirely likely that you have an idea that involves research infrastructure that would span multiple institutions, and that's great. We like to see that kind of collaboration, and that would certainly be eligible. So it could be something housed at a single institution, or it could be a more distributed infrastructure across multiple institutions.
Excellent. And Elisha, could you comment on how should shared costs across institutions be budgeted? Kind of a related topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So this information really should be specified within that detail column of our budget template. So say there was a $5,000 expense that was going to have a 50-50 cost share. You would list the expense within the amount column of your budget template as 2,500, and then within that detail column you would identify the full cost of that $5,000 expense and indicate which organization is sharing 50% of that cost.
Thank you. We did have one comment / question in the chat. Someone thanks you both for the informative presentation, and they're wondering if the grant is available for research focused on market adoption of plant proteins, for example, consumer behavior research.
Yeah, so we're unfortunately not focused on consumer research. So yes, looking at market adoption would fall outside of scope.
Thanks for that clarification. We have another question here. How much emphasis will reviewers place on the eventual funding opportunity versus the planning activities? And that one, Nick, do you want to address that one if you could?
Yes. So, reviewers will consider the funding opportunity in the sense that it meets the criteria, right? So, does it offer awards over $1 million US dollars? Is it likely to run? And then the big thing that your application has to address is your fit in that funding opportunity. So, if it seems unlikely that your intended proposal would fit well within that funding opportunity, then you're going to fail that relevance criterion that reviewers are considering. But otherwise, reviewers are not going to favor an application or, something coming from a funding opportunity from like one government agency versus another, or otherwise make a distinction between the funding opportunities in that sense.
Excellent. Thank you. I think this is probably a good spot to end the Q&A portion of the information session. Nicholas, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
Thank you again for joining us today to learn about GFI's 2026 Advancing Alternative Proteins Planning Grants. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to learn more about this opportunity, and we hope we're leaving you energized and excited to work on your applications. Should any more questions arise, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team via email at rfp@gfi.org. Again, that's rfp@gfi.org. And we really look forward to reviewing your submissions. So thank you so much for attending and have a great rest of your day.